This podcast is part of the Game and Entertainment Network. Visit tgenetwork.net to find the latest episodes from all our shows.
You're listening to Beyond Boss Fights, gaming conversations with interesting people. And now, here's your host, Braag.
Hello to all you viewers out there. Of course, that greeting is a tip of the hat to my guest for today. He's known within the LOTRO community for his in-depth descriptions of quests and instances within the game, as well as his parody songs and humorous poetry. He also occasionally confuses the method of consumption for audio entertainment. He is none other than Braag, son of Balin, the Shirley Dwarf from the Light the Beacons podcast, and he's here to talk about his use of a pseudonym during community involvement, his organic podcasting methods, and the difficulty in soliciting feedback for your show. But first, we're going to find out what the kids have been up to. Today on What Are the Kids Playing, we've got Tiny Brax. Hello, Tiny Brax. How are you doing today? You don't look that tiny.
Okay.
Okay, so what are we going to talk about today, Tiny Brax? What have you been playing?
Marvel Heroes.
Okay, Marvel Heroes, the superhero game with awesome powers and awesome characters.
Yeah.
From the Marvel Universe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what's your favorite character out of all the Marvel guys that you've played?
Oh, that's hard. Probably Hawkeye or Rocket.
Oh yeah? What's your favorite part about both of those guys?
I like Rocket because he can he can carry huge weapons, put down turrets and everything. And I like Hawkeye because he has gas arrows, fire arrows.
Yeah, a lot of trick arrows, doesn't he? So you like being able to shoot things at people? You don't like being the up-close fighter?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is your favorite thing about the whole game itself?
Ooh, I like to jetpack kids on the sky.
You like flying?
Yeah.
Who flies that you play?
Rocket.
Oh, Rocket does?
Yeah.
Hawkeye doesn't fly, does he?
No. Rocket has a jetpack.
Nice. Does he also have a Groot?
Yes.
Does he say, I am Groot?
Yes. When he comes in, he's like, you go through the door, he's like, oh, you're Groot.
What does Groot do? Does he stomp on people?
He just punches them and stuff.
Oh, okay.
And protects me! Like in the movie. Yeah.
Does Rocket say funny things? No?
He says bad words.
Well, you're supposed to ignore that, aren't you?
Yeah.
So if there was one thing that you could change about Marvel Heroes, what would you make different about the game?
I would change it so Hawkeye would have his motorcycle thing that flies. That thing.
Does he have a motorcycle that flies?
Yeah, it has a thing. Have you seen it before?
No, is it in the cartoon?
Yeah.
Oh.
It's in the cartoon.
See, I've only ever seen the movies. He doesn't have that in the movie.
No.
But you'd like for Hawkeye to fly too?
Yeah.
Are those are the only two players, or those are the only two characters you've played so far, right?
Yeah.
If you had the chance to pick another one, who would you pick?
Probably Deadpool.
Guess what?
What?
We're going to get to pick a new character this month because it's Marvel Heroes anniversary, and they're going to let us pick a character.
Yes. Can I get on right now?
No, you have to wait till we're done with the interview.
I like that you can change your characters. You don't have to stay that one character in the whole thing. So that's pretty cool.
You know what I like about it?
What?
I like that you and I can play together.
Oh, yeah, that's fun.
That is fun, isn't it? We get to be Hawkeye, and who do I play when I'm playing with you? Thor?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, well, say goodbye to the listeners.
Goodbye.
Okay, today on the show we have fellow podcaster and LOTRO friend of mine, Braag, son of Balin. Braag, welcome to the show.
Hey, Brax, thanks for having me.
No problem. And Braag, I'm a big fan of your podcast. I'm always in awe of people who can do a solo show like you do. So I'm really glad to have you on so we can talk about your process and talk about some of the things you do creatively on Light the Beacons.
Well, it's a mutual admiration society. I really have enjoyed the guest format that you have, and amazed at some of the people that you've been able to bring on and have conversations with. That must be very rewarding.
Yeah, thanks. It is. It's been a lot of fun. It's been a fun journey, as I tell people. You know, at the end of the day, it's fun to create something, but the journey is really where the fun is. Learning things along the way is what I've been doing through this whole thing. I think you've got some probably similar experiences there as well.
Yep. Well, sorry you have to slum with me this week. Maybe you'll nab a more high-profile guest next week.
Yeah, I've got President Obama on the list. He has not returned my call yet. So. I've got the thing that we do, though, with all of our guests is we go over your definitive gaming history. And so I'm interested to hear, Braag, where you came from a gaming perspective, when you started and what you're doing now that's led up to the podcasting and everything else that you're doing.
How far back do people normally go? I actually remember my parents having, and this is going to date me as well as my parents, a game of Pong in the house. That was probably the first home video game I ever played, an actual Pong console. And we thought it was so cool. But, I started getting into basic programming in grade school, and my parents wanted to encourage that. So they bought me a Commodore 64 at home. And I can remember downloading games by floppy disk like Ghostbusters and Lode Runner and Lemmings and stuff like that. And a couple of years later, that turned into an Intellivision unit. You remember those?
Yeah, I've heard of those.
So Intellivision was the alternative to Atari, intelligent television, as George Plimpton used to say. And they had a game called, believe it or not, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons at one point. That was, the height of coolness with the 16 pixels and penetrating dungeons to deeper levels and taking on all kinds of weird monsters, and believe it or not, building up a character by getting, better swords and better shields and better magic, lightning bolts and stuff like that. So it's kind of an early progenitor for the genre a little bit. And my best friend had an Atari, so I used to go over to his house to play Adventure, which was like one of the first, RPG games on the Atari unit. I think I bought it through one of those little joystick plug-in units a couple years back, just out of nostalgia. So in college, that turned into an Apple 512K. Now we're getting high-powered, where I discovered games like Dark Castle, Doom, and Descent. We may be getting into some names that you have heard of now. And, eventually after school, when I had a few kids, there was a built-in excuse for me to buy a Wii and enter the console market. And when I say excuse, obviously the better half has to be convinced this is a good investment. It's for the kids, honey. It's for the kids. So I'd say the best game I ever played on the Wii was, for the first couple of years, they were known more for some of their sports games using the motion controller and stuff like that. But eventually they came out with Zelda Twilight Princess. And that was the first Zelda game I'd ever played. And really, maybe my first experience where a game took, 60 to 80 hours of gameplay to get through because the world was so expansive and there was so much story. And that was, kind of an eye-opener for me as well. And a PS3 followed shortly thereafter with the excuse that it was a competitively priced Blu-ray player that could also do other stuff like Netflix, etc. You see the pattern of needing an excuse. However, the console gets pulled out now and again, but PC games really started to rear their head almost 10 years ago when I started getting into games like Myst, Zoo Tycoon, The Sims. Great little game no one's ever heard of. Still one of my favorites called Zanzara. And a number of Middle-earth related games such as Battle for Middle-earth and Lord of the Rings. And there were 3 or 4 with different names that came out around that time frame. I think I first saw LOTRO on a shelf in a Target store. And I bought Shadows of Angmar, and then and there I opened up the cover and I was like, oh, I got to have this. So, if you took 3 of my biggest obsessions growing up, Tolkien, which was a big thing in my family, starting with 3 older sisters that read all the books and thrust them upon me. They were trying to make me read the Silmarillion at 10, which is probably the last book I can remember that I started and didn't finish. I always felt badly about that, so I had to return to it eventually. But I played Dungeons and Dragons in grade school. I was one of the first kids to do that in my grade school. And so Tolkien, Dungeons and Dragons, and computer games, wrap them all into one bundle and get LOTRO. It was kind of a little nerdgasm waiting to happen, basically.
Yeah, I picked up Lord of the Rings Online box copy in a Best Buy around the time that it was coming out, and I didn't buy it. I can remember the first time I saw it, I thought, what in the world is this? It looks cool, but, at the time, what did it come out, 2007, something like that? My fourth child was born that year, so it's not like I was going to pick up a lot of games and just start, spending hours in them. So, but I do remember picking it up, looking at it, and setting it back down, thinking, yeah, that'd be a fun one to play sometime. And funny enough, 3 or 4 years later, I was able to download it and play it for free. So that was a pretty good deal.
Yeah, no kidding. From a gaming perspective, this is the problem, right? And I think you've had guests on that have talked about this, but I've always been a completionist. I don't like to start a game unless I'm going to finish it. But here was a game for the first time that you literally could not finish. Mm-hmm. There's always something more to do, and it's progressive. So, I became immediately, and I'll admit now, somewhat unhealthily obsessed, and it took a few years for me to find a little bit more balance. I had a lot of late nights after family had gone to bed where I, lost a lot of sleep, going, oh, look at this. I've never been here before. I got to explore this, and maybe just a little bit more, and all those types of things. So, I discovered Steam a few years back, so I have a growing library based on Humble Bundles and some things the community introduced me to, like Star Trek Online, Secret World, and DDO. I haven't played many of those significantly, just enough to kind of understand the gameplay and see how much I like it. I think I consider them kind of hedge bets, knowing that at some point LOTRO is going to die, and I wanted something to move to eventually, that I wasn't completely lost at. But really, the majority of my gaming is still dominated by LOTRO. I try to keep a rotation that has LOTRO in it. Maybe one console game that I'm working on, a mobile game I can mess around with when I'm on the road, and one other PC game in play at any one point in time. So I recently completed the new Tomb Raider that came out 2 years ago. Really enjoyed that. I'm playing Ori and the Blind Forest, which is also pretty fun. It's kind of a new age platformer. And my next conquest is my kids want me to play Portal and Portal 2 as my next objective for the PC. The first game ever, I think, that they finished, and I didn't start yet, so they want me to join in and see how I do.
You're going to really enjoy that. Portal 2 is one of my favorite games, and it was just because it was one of those where I made a decision when I started, and I only played, I think there's several different modes of difficulty. I only played the easiest mode. But even that, I decided at the beginning of the game, I'm not going to look at any videos. I'm just going to, if I can't figure it out, I'm just going to shut it off and come back another day. And I was able to finish the game doing that and just figuring out the puzzles with myself. And every once in a while, one of my sons would come over and look over my shoulder and say, hey, try this. And together we'd figure it out. That was a lot more satisfying to do it that way than to rush off to a YouTube video when I got stuck at some point.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I really enjoyed looking over my kids' shoulders. And, the game's got a great wry sense of humor that's extremely well done. I think that's a big part of the appeal.
Yeah, it's good. So I wanted to start to talk a little bit, first kind of introduce what your podcast is for people who haven't heard it. So I'm going to give you the opportunity now to tell us what Light the Beacons is.
Well, I took all the advice from people in the podcast community that said, don't focus on one thing because you never know where your interests are going to go and you don't want to pigeonhole yourself. And I threw that out the window. It's pretty much a LOTRO-focused podcast. I mean, I do like to touch on Tolkien lore and pop culture, or anything that touches the genre strongly. And occasionally I'll inject some things about other games I'm playing, things that I think people that play LOTRO would be interested in general. I'm a big movie buff. I like to read fantasy books and sci-fi books and stay up on pop culture, as a kind of a fun sideline. So I inject those things where they're appropriate. But really the main thrust of the story is Lord of the Rings Online. And it kind of got born out of, the influence of the community. So, I've heard the same story from most of the people that I've talked with. They started getting into LOTRO. They discovered that there were some podcasts around it and somehow, ended up with CSTM, right? Mm-hmm. and from there kind of expanded out as things, I think early on, some of these podcasts are gone now, but I really used to enjoy LOTROcast and, Through the Palantir and Liquid LOTRO and Beneath Your Feet and obviously MMO Reporter, CSTM. I'm probably missing a few. And and from there contains Moderate Peril as well, which I love because it started out very LOTRO focused, but Roger talks about a lot of movie topics, and I'm a big movie buff as well. Mm-hmm. So I really think he's got one of the more slickly produced private podcasts I've come across. So I really enjoy that as well. Sad to see him leave, but as I was listening to all these podcasts, I find myself wanting to write in and chime in as a comment, on their topics, or even engage with them in some way, which I think is most podcasters have a desire to engage with the community at some level. And I really felt like I had stuff to say that oh, you didn't mention this, or what's kind of cool is this that you were talking about. So I started to come to realize that I had something to contribute. And, it might be more substantive than just entering comments or calling in to discuss with things. And, I kind of kicked around the idea of trying my own podcast for a year without actually doing it. I reserved the site, the URL, and put a coming soon maybe note out there for, almost a year basically before I finally said, well, it's either get the kettle on the stove here and get moving if I'm ever going to do something with this. Part of it is hesitance. You come to realize you don't need to be an expert to do a podcast. There are a lot of people doing podcasting that are not experts on the subjects. They just have to have enthusiasm and a kind of a love for the topic. And after 7+ years, I know a crud load about LOTRO, but it's probably embarrassing how much I know about it. But there's always someone who knows more. There are people out there with unlimited time to play games, and you can never compete with them. And you kind of have to come to realize that after a while, right? Mm-hmm. So, I came to realize, you don't have to be the be-all, end-all. As a matter of fact, most of the people I was listening to, I felt didn't know as much about the game as I did in a lot of cases. So, most of all, I felt like the podcast I wanted to do was filling a niche that wasn't really being covered by anyone else. A different spin or take, and maybe getting, in some cases, into one more level of depth than other people were talking to. And in other cases, not taking yourself too seriously and trying to have some fun.
It's interesting how I found Light the Beacons, because I found it was very soon after you released your first episode. I'm thinking maybe like maybe a couple days after the first episode was released, but I happened to it by accident because when I was doing LOTRO Players News, I used to go out every once in a while and just do a search on LOTRO Podcast to see what else was out there. Kind of like the same way that I keep an eye on the blogosphere to see if there's any new LOTRO blogs popping up in here. And because of the way you titled your show, it actually popped up pretty high in the Google rankings. And I went to it and I went, well, this is a brand new podcast. I've never heard of this before. So I was pleasantly surprised to find a new one. I think I wrote to you right away when I found it and said, hey, I'm going to listen to this. I'm also going to highlight you on LOTRO Players News because I like doing that for folks that, are fairly new into the community. It turned out to be not only a fun podcast to promote because it was new, but I was really enjoying the content. And from episode 1, I thought to myself, yeah, I knew you had some audio issues and you were learning how to do things along the way, but the content was there. And that's what really impressed me was from day 1, you had a format that you followed, you had the expertise that you could rely on, and you had a sense of humor that you're injecting. And I thought, boy, those 3 things together are going to make a really fun LOTRO podcast. And I'm glad to see where it's gone.
Oh, thanks. I think like you mentioned, right about that time when I was getting started, there were a number of podcasts that were ending, right? There weren't really too many that were getting going. There have been a few more that have joined since then, but it seemed like the community was waning a bit. Mm-hmm. And, I think LPN has done a lot to revive it. I think there's just people that want to engage and have fun with each other and that are starting to interact through all these different channels and mediums, and that's really fun to see.
I wanted to talk a little bit because on one of your earlier episodes, you had a really good segment about why you use the name Braag, son of Balin, and why you don't go by your normal everyday real life name. The reason that I thought this was good timing to talk about this with you was because I think you're aware of DJ Pimp Daddy. He was a guest of mine earlier on.
Yeah.
He went by Andrew. He very recently got to a point where he had what he called an existential crisis, I think. and he basically deleted his entire DJ Pimp Daddy internet presence and didn't tell anybody he was going to do it. And I found out about it I was going to do a Follow Friday for people who made me laugh, and he's one of the guys that always made me laugh on Twitter. And I tried to find his name, and he wasn't out there. And so I'm hunting all over the place going, what happened here? And it turned out he just went, you know what? I didn't want my legacy to be a fake name spewing stupid jokes on the internet. So I'm just going to completely get rid of all of this. I'm going to be who I am, my real self, and I'm going to forget about the persona that I was becoming through DJ Pimp Daddy. And yet some of us continue to use kind of a pseudonym, quote unquote, alternate gamer personality for the content that we're producing. You're one of them. I'm one of them. So I wanted to have this conversation with you today. Since Braag is the persona you use on the podcast, why do you choose to use that? And really, what was the thinking behind that?
Well, before we go there, I just got to say, hopefully DJ Pimp Daddy, or the art, as Pine Leaf referred to him, I like this, the artist formerly known as DJ Pimp Daddy. I think, it seems kind of like getting a tattoo in college that you don't want later on in life, I mean, there's not too much offensive about the name Braag. Braag Pimp Daddy, I probably wouldn't have been excited.
I probably wouldn't have gone with that. But the thing is, he went by Andrew on my show. It was episode 9. I remember very well because it's actually still one of my most downloaded episodes. It was just a fascinating story that he told.
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
In his true voice. It wasn't, I'm funny internet man. It was, these are the real life hard experiences that I've had building community. And so whatever happened on that episode didn't really take. And he continued to be known as the persona of DJ Pimp Daddy going forward.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to shake. But he'll get there. And he seems like a really fun guy. I haven't met him personally. But, from my perspective, well, Braag is my main character in game. I've loved dwarves ever since the Tolkien and really the Sword of Shannara series. I don't know if you've ever read that one with Terry Brooks. I still think one of the greater fantasy series out there outside of Tolkien. Their greed is very relatable to me, I think. But I always loved Moria from the books and the movies. Every glimpse of it was just kind of this fantastic underground kingdom really lit my imagination. So I knew I wanted to be a dwarf immediately in the game, and then Guardian seemed like the logical choice for a dwarf. So that's kind of where the name came from. I try to use a technique in game from a naming perspective where all my characters start with a BR, just so that kinmates would know it was me when I was on an alt. But why use the pseudonym for a podcast? I think there's at least 3 factors. First of all, I think it's fun. I'm not a role player in game generally, but I respect role players, and I've done it once or twice. And here's my chance to RP. I can be a dwarf on my podcast. Secondly, as great as the community is, it's unfortunate that the internet is, as we know, an ugly place at times. And I had no idea where the podcast might go, and I didn't want to be a target. It just seemed like the benefits of using a pseudonym far outweighed the potential issues with not using it, which is unfortunate, but, somewhat of a reality. And then thirdly, as I mentioned in my podcast, there's a bit of a concern about, as George Costanza on Seinfeld would say, worlds colliding.
Yeah.
He never wanted his girlfriend to meet his friends. Well, there's concern about gaming prejudice impacting my personal or professional life. It's not that I'm ashamed of gaming, but I know that there are people out there that have preset stereotypes about, people that play games and what they do and how they're using their time. And you're going to run into some of those people in business. And it just didn't seem like, given I think the professional markets are going more and more towards researching internet histories for folks as part of interview processes for positions, that a lot of things could come out where, maybe I'd feel inhibited with what I was putting in terms of content on my show if I knew that could be tracked down and attached to me. And I didn't want to have any of those considerations. This gives me more freedom to be goofy, to be creative, to do things that other people might judge. I think that's, if they're judging me for doing those things, that's more their problem than mine from my perspective. But if they're an employer, then it becomes my problem. So, like I said, I just think the benefits of maintaining a pseudonym outweighed the positives of using my actual name, and why take the chance of having it come back to bite you in some form or fashion.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And I guess my experience is somewhat similar from the standpoint of, because I have a large family and a young children in the house, I was very kind of protective of that identity. And being in IT, I understand how things proliferate on the net, right? And every time I see a report of swatting going on with a streamer or someone else, I feel a little bit more vindicated in my decision to be not so public with my actual persona. I didn't think so much about the other side of it, which was keeping the gaming hobby from real life. But that comes up enough that I believe it is still an issue in some cases. And it's interesting, as much as I've had people on my show that have said, gaming is just gaming. Everybody games now. And I think Leonor said that when he was on my show. And in some ways that is true, but I think there's still kind of a stigma around certain types of gaming. MMOs being one of those. That's because it's so immersive and something that people spend so much time doing. It's different than pulling out your phone and playing Clash of Clans or Candy Crush or something.
It's definitely becoming more and more prevalent. But I mean, if you look, how many, C-level executives at companies do you know that have come out and say that aren't in the industry that say they play games? It just, there's a certain level of, I think in a lot of, white collar positions where it's just not spoken about, even if it's happening.
Yeah, I'm finding more and more within my job. I actually walked by somebody's cubicle today that had a Destiny poster hanging up. And I'm noticing that because it's a lot different than the environment that I was hired into some almost 20 years ago. It is more acceptable now, and it's usually younger people, and it's usually people in more of a creative job that are able to do that and get away with it. But I do think that some of it depends probably on the industry that you're in as well.
So what if you were playing, World of Warcraft with your boss, and, you found him online at 1 a.m. the night before a big presentation for a client? Mm-hmm. Would you judge that person for, being up at that hour and doing those things? I mean, you might, right? Depends
on their performance the next day, I guess.
Yeah. The guy, well, I was AFK crafting, right? He can just say.
So I guess in talking about our real lives versus our quote-unquote gaming lives, how does Braag relate to your real-life identity? And do you ever find it difficult to kind of keep the two things segmented?
That sounds like a plot to a bad novel, I think. I don't know, you probably wouldn't have remembered this, but I remember when Dungeons and Dragons was big back in the 70s and 80s, there was a TV special that came out about like kids in college that were playing Dungeons and Dragons in the steam tunnels underneath their college, and they like got lost and someone got murdered or something. I don't remember. No, I'm not a dwarf in real life. Not that there's anything wrong with that. When I do the show, I kind of flow seamlessly between speaking as Braag and speaking as myself, because it's too hard to orchestrate separating the two at times. If you just kind of have a curmudgeonly demeanor going in, it's not that hard. But I like speaking as Braag because it allows me to highlight lore and in-game locations from the character's perspective, which I feel can spark kind of echoing memories in the audience, reminds them of common experiences in the game. For example, one of the things I do is I've been lately opening up each game at, my mobile headquarters in a different area of the environment and just describing what I see. Because I think it's a good way of, when someone does that and I'm listening to a podcast, I start thinking about the area that they're in and what's there and what's interesting about it and how I haven't seen it in a while. And I think it just kind of engages people, through that common experience. Segmenting the two, yeah. I don't say Baruch Kazad around the house to my kids or anything, I've played pieces of my podcast here and there for them for a joke. I've got a teen daughter. She rolls her eyes at me, a lot. That being said, she has a level capped lore master, even though she has never played an instance in the game. She's followed the epic quest line and done everything. And she got mad the other day that she didn't know update 6. I didn't tell her update 16 was out, and she got mad when she saw me in Osgiliath. She was, Dad, there's new content. You didn't tell me. I'm like, yeah, you play on my account. I got to get through it before I give it to you.
One of the things I've noticed is that you mainly use social media to promote the podcast, at least your Braag social media accounts? Is that something that you do consciously to kind of keep things segmented? I know I'm a little bit different. I actually use my Twitter account for a lot more than that. And sometimes it does get me into a little bit of trouble. Every once in a while, I get kind of grouchy and crabby about something when I should just be getting up and walking away from the computer. And when you are using it to promote as well as throw your personal feelings out there, sometimes I'm a little conflicted as to how well am I actually promoting the material that I'm creating when I'm also being, Mr. Krabby old guy over here at the same time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was never a big Twitter guy, and I kind of felt like I had to create an account. It seemed like everybody I knew that had podcasts was using Twitter to kind of spread the word about when new episodes were coming out, or to, reach out to folks about it. So I was like, well, I need to understand Twitter anyway at some point. I use other social media. It's just this isn't one I've gotten into. Let me make sure I always try to make sure I understand kind of what the latest and greatest is out there, because I've got, again, kids, and it's good to know what they're getting engaged with. So I thought it was all positive, and really my only intention was to occasionally tweet out that I had episodes coming out, or that the beacons were going to be dark that week, or whatever the case may be. But as other people have started following me, and I've started following them, I have found myself engaging more through the Twitter account than I had originally banked on, just because the community network is spreading a little bit, and it's been fun. But I do not have I do have a personal Twitter account, which I almost never use, and I've got other social media accounts that are personal, and I am trying to tread the line of keeping them all completely separate. If I had a Twitter account that I was actively using, I'd probably engage with, family members, professional colleagues, whatever, and then having the two cross streams again provides the same kind of conflict and issues that we talked about in the last segment. Using social media, I try not to go overboard. I'm not just a lurker, but I don't post a picture of every meal either or anything like that. I try to highlight either something momentous or out of the ordinary that I think friends and family will appreciate without driving them to insanity with mundane and what I would call posting for the sake of posting, just so they don't forget you're there. But when deciding what to post or discuss on the show as Braag, I find having a comedic spin to topics is helpful for me, because comedy is an area over the years that's been somewhat PC proof, I call it, politically correct proof, because you can call something a parody and get away with a lot of stuff you would never be able to normally when taking a hard line on a contentious issue. And that way, I think comedy and humor are important in our society just for that reason. You can poke fun at the insanity of daily life without being labeled an activist for whatever cause you happen to be railing against. And, I think it grounds us. Look what Jon Stewart did with The Daily Show. I used to hate watching the news until he came on, and then all of a sudden I became very involved with it. That's the power that kind of approach takes.
So I noticed that you were in the Newbie Blogger Initiative this year.
Yeah, that was fun.
One of the things that you did as a result of that is you got more political on one of your shows than I've ever heard you get before, where you actually there was a challenge for the bloggers to write about how Gamergate affected them. And since you were a podcaster, you put a segment into your show that had to do with how Gamergate affected you. And I found it to be one of the most serious and in-depth pieces that you've done, segments that you've done on your show. First of all, could you kind of walk us through the thinking there and how that came about?
It was, a bit of a challenge, except I don't mind getting to weightier topics on the podcast now and then. It gives it substance. I like having kind of, playing to different strengths. Gamergate was a topic that, obviously was impacting the community around me because I'd seen a lot of people react to it. But I also felt I was a bit in the wake of the news, right? It had passed and it hadn't really been something I'd been totally engaged with. And when giving my take on it, I tried to communicate that, if there was a fault that I'd had, right? If you're passionate about something or you believe in, something that's, that you're engaged with, taking a pass on important issues that impact it is not a healthy way to approach things. And the silent or the vocal minority often shouts down the silent majority, and the only way that gets turned around is when journalists highlight the issues, and then the community reacts to it and lets the vocal minority know that they're not going to railroad everybody about this issue, and that other people do care about it. So I don't equate myself enough with the gamer title that I felt it impacted me and was worth kind of researching on a personal level when it first came out. But I was just trying to highlight the fact that it was impacting something I'm involved with and with people that I know, and that I think most people, most adults have a responsibility to understand issues of that nature, at least at some level, and get engaged, because if you don't, then the trolls win.
Yeah, I thought it was a different side of Braag, and it was probably a bit of a risk for you, being that your podcast is normally a little bit more lighthearted. So I appreciated what you did there, and I'm not even sure that I kind of sidestepped the issue in my blog post a little bit. I didn't really address it on a personal level very much, but I think that it was something that was important for us to address. There was a lot of the person who suggested the topic got a lot of flack for it, because some people just want it to go away and don't want to talk about it at all. But I think it was healthy to hear that kind of a retrospect of here's how it affected me, and let's hope we don't ever have to go through something like that again.
Yeah, that's the kind of topic where it's, I try to be extemporaneous on my podcast here and there, but that's one of those topics where I felt like, this is the benefit of being thought out a little bit more. And so, that was largely scripted, at least. Not all parts of my show are, but you don't want to misspeak on a topic that's a bit more serious, obviously, and have someone, take what you're saying out of context.
So speaking of being scripted or non-scripted, I'm very interested to talk to you about the creation process of Light the Beacon. So walk us through kind of the normal process for creating an episode of Light the Beacons. What's involved in that?
Well, I originally tried to make it a weekly show.
That's tough.
And when I started off, but quickly I realized that was not going to work long term, especially in a solo format. Some weeks I would play enough to generate some topics that I thought were of interest, and others I wouldn't. Life would get in the way more often. And I think if people, expect you to come out weekly, then they're disappointed if it doesn't come out. And I thought I could do a much better job of kind of, marshaling my creativity on a bi-weekly basis. So it's kind of funny because after a podcast comes out, I kind of have this like relief, and maybe I listen to it in the car the next day to make sure the sound was okay and people aren't going to complain. And then like for a couple days, I don't think about it at all. And then, in the second week, I start going, well, I haven't played much this week. I guess I should start thinking about what I'm doing. And then I start to get like a little more, I wouldn't call it anxiety, but like a little more motivation. And, over the course of the next week, and then a day or two before the show, I'm like, it's kind of like having a baby. And I'm like, I got to have this baby, every 2 weeks. Then I can recover, and then I have to, go into labor again in another week's time. But, as a solo show, you have to be somewhat scripted to keep from meandering. So I have a rough outline that I work from. And the way I put that together is usually I jot down notes over the course of the week from gameplay or community content that perks my interest, and then I flesh out the gaps on a Monday or Tuesday over a break at work or after, at night or something like that. But you'd be somewhat disturbed how simplistic my recording and editing is. Basically, there is no editing. I mean, occasionally I'll start a podcast and go, let me start that again. But once the mic starts rolling, I don't do any post-processing at all. So that's kind of sad. I know there's a lot of ums and ahas and, throat clearings and stuff that happen here and there. Occasionally I'll pause and take a drink or something like that, but I'm not obsessive about it whatsoever. If I'm playing a sound effect, it's probably like a little stereo speaker held up to the microphone. I mean, it's really sad. So, part of the reason I never had a guest on the show is I'd have to figure out how to do that. Not that it's hard, I'm sure. I'm not technically incompetent, but I'd like to be more polished, but I just can't afford the time, really. It's about choices. I made a deal with myself when I started this that I wasn't going to fuss over the details, that if the content was good and if I spent some time ahead thinking about it, then the message would get across, and it wasn't about, how much, that I had an extra pause for an extra second in between here or there, or that I, had a malaprop here or there, or whatever the case may be. So that was kind of the deal I made with myself. And, for the most part, I mean, there are some segments I go back and I listen to. I'm like, oh, that was a little rough. But, for the most part, I think it works. I have decent history from my work experience of public speaking, so I can find a way to pull it off somehow.
That makes sense.
Are you surprised at all when I say I don't edit? Because you've said before that you're kind of very intensive about that process, and I know others I've heard say their podcasts as well.
Yeah, I'm not surprised only because I know what an edit sounds like. If that makes sense, because I do it so much that when I listen to other people's shows, I can go, oh, yep, they cut something out there, and I don't hear that in your show. It's obvious, when you take a drink or but there are plenty of podcasts. Let's just put this out there. The way that I do it is not the right way to do it necessarily. AgroChat is famous at TGen for basically letting the tape roll. This is the old days. Letting the recorder roll and just throwing it out there the next day, And it's great. It's organic and it's a great discussion and they know what they're talking about. And I think they forget that they're doing a podcast sometimes, which makes it even easier to just have a conversation. I have a feeling that Joseph, when he was doing his solo shows, didn't do a ton of editing, but he also had a great outline going. And I don't know how he did it. Every single show was 30 minutes long. I don't know how he did it, but
he knew how to time his rants.
Yeah, and, I guess so.
He certainly had the heavy metal cuts rolling too. So
yeah, so it doesn't surprise me that you say that, but it also doesn't surprise me that you say you have a background in public speaking, because the way that you continue to speak for, 40 to 60 minutes an episode, and especially when you're describing what has gone on in game or a specific instance that you're talking about that particular day, I noticed very few stumbles. I mean, you really do just roll with it. And the same thing comes with the spots that you've done on LOTRO Players News. One of my favorite things I just listened to again today was the Pine Leaf origin story that you did when you came on LOTRO Players News in the Night Before Christmas parody, I guess you could call it.
Yep.
And it was just a great moment. And I think I'm really in awe, because here I am stumbling around right now, and I'm in awe of somebody who can talk by themselves for that amount of time and continue to be interesting and funny and not stumble over their own words,
Yeah, you have to be somewhat infatuated with hearing yourself talk, right? There's a level of narcissism involved, I guess.
I think any podcaster has that,
right?
Very deep down somewhere.
And what you don't know is I've got a big mirror behind me, behind the computer, so I can watch myself when I'm podcasting too. And I'm just kidding, if anyone's wondering.
So going back to some of the humor that you've injected, how do you go about thinking, okay, this part of the episode needs some humor, let's go with something funny? Where do you get the inspiration for that, first of all? And second of all, how do you know that it's going to be funny?
Oh, boy. Well, it isn't always, first of all. I'm sure there's some bits that have fallen flat over time. I love creative people, and I don't consider myself one, but I consider myself kind of creative person wannabe. I'm talented enough to be dangerous. And, one day when I retire from IT, I have aspirations of writing a novel or two. I play with ideas now and then to try to keep in practice. But, I've always kind of valued having some kind of creative outlet in my life, whether it was, theater or music, choral singing or creative writing or poetry, and being a well-rounded person. So having the other side of the coin and being athletic or handy or doing this or that, that's more manly stuff, right? So I've always felt that, those kinds of things, like if I don't do something like that constantly, it kind of builds up and it bothers me. And really for the last year, podcasting has been a big part of that creative outlet for me, where in the past I might have done, fiddling around with a guitar or tried to learn a song or, wrote some poetry or did this and that. I've always enjoyed creative writing. The humor part, I don't, where's the inspiration? I guess, I try to think of, first of all, you got to be able to poke fun at yourself. So that's a good place to start. If you take yourself too seriously with this stuff, you're opening yourself up for criticism. So if you're willing to make fun of yourself, I think it goes from there. There's plenty of seriousness in the genre that requires a little poke here and there, and it's not too hard to find. The devs have a good sense of humor. They put humor into the game. You just have to look for it. Tolkien's pretty serious, but do you ever read what was it called? The parody of the Lord of the Rings called Board of the Rings by the Harvard Lampoon?
No.
Oh my gosh! You should look that up at some point. It's a real quick read. It's only 90 pages or something like that. But it's kind of a classic. They've got funny names for all the characters, and they kind of they make fun of all the situations in the game. They say stuff like Boromir reads a passage from the book, and it says, "Roses are red, violets are blue. You cash in your chips around page 92." Stuff. I mean, it's good stuff. You should check that out if you get a chance. So I think the topic is ripe for fun, and really it helps keep me interested in the podcast. I try to do what I would want to listen to or what I would enjoy, because it keeps me coming back and wanting to do the podcast again, and helps keep me from burning out on it. Everything must end at some point. All good things end, and even cruddy stuff like my podcast will end someday. But as long as I'm having fun with it, and here's the thing, like LOTRO Players News, you could tell everyone's having fun. It's all about the interactions with each other and cutting up and having a good time again and again. The 100th episode, people talked about that. So I kind of have to find a way to amuse myself, right? So
You've also put some of the various larger members of the community under the spotlight with some of your, roasting almost every once in a while. Have you ever come under fire for doing that? Because some of these people are fiercely protected within the community.
Oh, like when I made fun of Golden Star not being able to pronounce character names or something?
That was the first one that came to mind, yeah.
Well, I certainly listened to Golden Star and Merrick enough that, I felt, that's the kind of thing. It's like you feel like you kind of know them. Like if you listen to a podcast all the time, you kind of feel like those person are your friends, even if they don't know you from Adam. So
yeah.
You have to be a little careful about that. I probably got over familiar on that, but I thought I know them well enough that they would take it in good spirits. And by the way, the podcast was just starting out, so the chances are they were probably never going to hear it anyway. I didn't have an audience at that point. I think the second episode was called No Longer Shouting Into the Void, because I looked at my stats and I had a listener. Maybe that was you.
I think it might have been, because I'm pretty sure I listened to episode 1.
No, I've never gotten criticism. Everyone's been very nice. Not everybody has reached out to me to say, hey, I listened to your show and I've enjoyed it. But a lot of people have, and hopefully everybody realizes like you said, if you poke fun at yourself first, then it kind of helps.
We've kind of talked about this, I think, before, maybe even on other podcasts, but for whatever reason, it's really tough to get people to give podcast feedback.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would, if I had to guess, I'd say less than 5% of the people that listen to podcasts, actually engage with the people that are producing them. I'd message to all the viewers out there. I'd say,
mine aren't viewers. Yours are viewers. Mine aren't viewers.
So don't lurk. Speak up now and then. It really makes a difference for me when I get a comment from somebody, especially if it's someone I've never heard from before.
Mm-hmm.
I've had some iTunes reviews where it was like, this guy's okay, but he kind of does a shtick thing. It's a little too shticky for me. And it's like, yeah, I'm being shticky. I know I'm being, less than serious in a lot of cases. And that's not for everyone. You're not going to please everyone. So you have to realize that going in and hopefully have a thick skin. But for anyone who's on the fence about, writing a note in, whether it's on an iTunes review or on someone's site or on a Twitter account, I'd say a little goes a long way. If I hear from one new listener in a week that I haven't heard from before, it really makes my week.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I do think that there are folks out there that, because we talked about this before, right? People start to feel like they know you after they listen to you for a while. But I was that way with CSTM as well. I listened to them for 2 years and never once really interacted with them, but I felt like I knew them. And on their 200th episode, I was practically in tears by the end of it, right?
Yep.
And they probably had no idea who I was at that time. So it is kind of a fun and interesting dynamic in that your listeners feel like they know you so much, and yet at the same time aren't really engaging with you.
Right. Think about Baby Hobbit. She's got like a couple hundred or 1,000 virtual aunts and uncles out there.
Yeah, exactly.
We're all interested in how she's coming along. That's very interesting. I agree. You
kind of talked about trying to avoid burnout before, and this is something that I think all of us face at some point, I've been doing this show for a year and a half now, and I'm not making any announcement here or anything. I'm just saying that you get to about that period of time, even if it's only a monthly show like mine is.
You can't cancel after this, Brax. People will blame me. They'll be like, Bragg came on, and Bragg said, "That's it. I'm not doing this anymore.
No,
this is ridiculous."
I don't have any plans to do that.
Okay.
But it is a very real possibility, and I do find myself at times not as enthusiastic as I potentially was around episode 3 or 4 or 5. And you talked about the whole. I really loved the analogy you gave earlier, or the imagery around giving birth to a baby every 2 weeks. For me, it's every month, but it's the same thing. I get it out and I'm like, oh, that was awesome. I produced something. Look at it. It's out there. People are listening to it. And now I want to forget about this for 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What happens when that 2 weeks becomes 3 weeks or 4 weeks? And I just don't want to deal with it. And I don't have any more ideas. Have you thought about the possibility of burnout with either the podcast or the game or the community? And have you taken any steps to kind of prepare for that?
Well, it's one thing I've learned about the industry since I've started paying attention to it over the last few years. It's podcasts and blogs are definitely ephemeral, right? Mm-hmm. You need to enjoy them while you can. The private, I don't know across all industries, but the ones I've been, it seems like the ones that make it, there's some benchmarks to say this, the ones that make it past, 15 or 20 episodes will be around for a little bit. And, the ones that get beyond that don't make it beyond 3 or 4 years because either personally their situation changes or their interests change or whatever the case may be. Unless they're crossing over and trying to make go of actually making some money out of it, which is obviously my primary driver here. It's the cash. I need to quit my IT job as soon as possible and live off my podcasting.
You're almost there.
I think with LOTRO, I think I'm a lifer, quote unquote. I'm doing air quotes for the viewers, whatever that means at this point. With the de-emphasis on group content over the last few years, the importance of the grind has been reduced. And for me, it's never about being, the best character in the game. It's always been about just being good enough to experience all the content, even if you didn't, quote unquote, win. Mm-hmm. Winning's nice, don't get me wrong, but I wanted to see it all. I remember for years when I started playing the game, everyone was talking about the Rift, how great the Rift was. It was the greatest instance ever. It was, these are good instances, but it's nothing like the Rift. And I never get a chance to see it because, you needed a 4 or 5 hour block of time to play to do the Rift. And you had to find, 10 to 12 other people that were willing to spend that same amount of time as well, which was nearly impossible. I still remember one Saturday, my family left for the weekend. I was supposed to be home doing projects and I got on board and I sat there. I said, 1 of 12 for the Rift, 1 of 12 for the Rift, 1 of 12, probably for an hour until I finally got enough people interested and I went out and did it. And it is cool. It is something that everyone in the game should see. And you can go through it with a high level character now. You don't have to get a big group together, but it's more about wanting to see all the different places in the game that I heard people talking about. So it's hard to envision my ever being so obsessed with another game or topic that I would want to do something like this podcast again. Mm-hmm. But we all need something to obsess about. I'm sure something new will come along. Whether I podcast about it or not is something that's up in the air. To some degree, LTV was an attempt to prove I could do this. Create a web page, RSS feed, set up the site, figure out the recording, and I'm still proving it. So there are a lot of podcasts that don't make it over a year and through 35 episodes. So I'm kind of proud of that in a way.
Yep.
If I feel it's getting tired or if I'm running out of original ideas, I'll hang it up. But right now I'm still enjoying it a good deal, and I feel like I still have a fair amount to say. Sometimes I feel like, maybe I'm doing kind of wilder and crazier topics to keep people alert and paying attention. But there's only so far you can go. Really, at the end of the day, if you don't have content that's engaging people, then, it's time to hang it up. So, again, back to the viewers, letting you know that what you're doing is entertaining them. And I just want to continue to putter around and hopefully make people smile now and again, brighten up someone's commute or give them something to look forward to. And that in itself is a very satisfying experience for me. And being considered a contributing part of the community that I've followed for so long, that's recognized by some of the other folks I've followed in the past, is also pretty fulfilling. So, thanks for giving me the opportunity to come on and visit with you today and do just that.
Oh yeah, that's another good point. Meeting some of the people that we had so long kind of followed or interacted with on the fringes or haven't ever interacted with, that is a very fulfilling part of it. As well as, I'll be honest with you, kind of going back to the narcissism, it's fun to log into Landerville and have somebody send you a tell that says, hey, aren't you on a podcast about LOTRO or something like that? That's kind of a neat little thing. You know, I used to just kind of stand around the Prancing Pony and look around and see if I recognized anybody that was in the chat room, you know, the other day.
You know, you're more famous than I am. I've in the year plus that I've been doing the show, I've had maybe one person in game recognize me from the podcast and send me a tell. What?
It actually took a long time for me as well. We were probably past our first year when somebody finally recognized me, and that's only on Landerville. On my home server, Winfola, nobody ever does. So
that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, a server, you know, there are a lot of people in the community that congregate around Landerville and Brandywine, obviously, and maybe if Villia's ever merged with another server and transfer somewhere that has more people I know, that will be cool too. But you know, I have to say, sometimes I enjoy the anonymity, just being able to log in and do what I'm doing and focus on the game, and you know, it kind of depends, right?
Right.
And on the mood I'm in.
We talked a little bit about our favorite moments on our LOTRO Players News this past weekend. What's your favorite moment of Light the Beacons?
I amused myself with the April Fool's joke. I have to admit, I listened to that a few times and was cracking up at myself. So I appreciate that bit. I have a feeling he'll be back.
Do you want to explain that just in case people haven't heard it?
So I was kind of thinking about doing an April Fool's joke for a long time. Well, not for a long time, a couple days leading up to it. And so at the last minute, I decided to throw something together where I pretended to be Grima Wormtongue. And Grima had been one of my comic foils in the podcast for a few episodes where I had kind of found a way to make him my manservant, was dragging him around Moria, making him, you know, scrub stalactites with his toothbrush and pick up orc slime and stuff like that. You know, so I figured this was his time to turn things around. So I made an episode called Douse the Beacons, which was dictated by Grima. He had tied up Braag and thrown him in the back closet or something like that, and had his unique point of worldview that was espoused, which is kind of the reverse of the general podcast. So, you know, I think I found a character in there somewhere. He may be back.
You know, what was fun about that, I think that was the first time we actually heard Grima's voice, wasn't it?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe he sneered at somebody at one point in time or another. Not sure.
So it went from being kind of an off-camera role to taking the spotlight on the podcast.
And the other thing that made me laugh probably was when I came up with the Extends for Dwarves advertising spot. EFD.
Yes, that's right. I would like to keep my clean tag though. So
right. That's it's all about platform shoes, as far as you know.
Yeah. So moving right along.
Yeah.
I wanted to say that obviously one of the most memorable was, well, two of the things. The first time you did a song, I think, was the Oathbreakers song to the Ghostbusters theme.
Right.
And that really cracked me up because it was so, I don't know, in hindsight, it was so obvious, you know, but nobody had ever thought to do something like that before. And you didn't try to do it really well. You just said, okay, I'm going to play the music and I'm just going to sing to it. And if I remember the lyrics, that's great. You know, that's an added bonus. It was a lot of fun. And obviously the Bjorning song that you did to Sir Mix-a-Lot was also a very memorable moment in Light the
Bjorning
Beacons
got
history.
back.
Yes, Bjorning got back.
Right. And I've done one other song parody that was a little briefer. That was the So Long to Patience, or Sapience. So Long
that's
to
right.
Sapience.
That's right. I'd forgot about that one.
Not quite as humorous as the others, but...
And I would say you were the first one that I heard do the Bjorning got back joke, and I've heard it on subsequent shows since then. But I think you own the patent on that one.
Yeah, people jumped on the bandwagon. MMO Reporter came up with it like a week later, and I had to send him a note.
Cease and desist. Just wanted to touch on one last thing here. Do you have any, grand vision for the future plans of Light the Beacons and or your community involvement?
It's really, kind of what I talked about. It's never, I'm actually NBAI has kind of increased my viewership a bit, which has been really nice. A lot of the people on there were very generous about, doing Follow Fridays or promoting my links or, following my feed. So that was really neat. But I just want to be able to, keep myself engaged and, make people smile about it. And if I can continue to be inventive and come up with things that are kind of new and fresh to keep it rolling, that's really the only goal I have, is to continue to be engaged enough that I'm providing some, valuable player detail or feedback about the game that maybe not everybody would be aware of, but also just, brightening someone's day once every 2 weeks or so for a couple minutes. What about you? I mean, your interview format, as your network expands, you have more people that you can bring in and talk to about interesting topics. I mean, do you have a long backlog of ideas, or do you just let them come to you as the community and the news develops?
It's a great question. I have a bit of a backlog. The problem is I have a kind of a list of topic ideas, and I have kind of a list of people that I'd like to have on the show. And sometimes the most difficult part is matching those two lists up.
Right.
Because I like to have people that can have some background in the topic that I'd like to talk about, but it doesn't always work out that way. And every once in a while, I just have to have somebody on that I really want to have on. You're a good example. I mean, we have kind of a topic tonight, but half of the show was just us talking about the things that you do with your podcast. But sometimes it's kind of difficult to figure out who's going to be a good fit for what topic. And I haven't been brave enough yet to just bring somebody on and just start talking to them. I like to have a somewhat, as you can kind of see in front of you, somewhat of an outline ready. So that does make it a little bit difficult, and I wish I could say I had the next 6 months planned out, but typically what happens is I'll see something on Twitter, or I'll watch something unfold in the blogosphere, or I'll see something that a game is struggling with, and I'll say, well, that sounds like a good topic this month. Who can I bring on to talk about that? So that's kind of the way it goes, I think, here on Beyond Boss Fights. So I've got just a couple updates for the loyal viewers. First of all, I wanted to bring to everybody's attention that one of the founding podcasts for the Gaming and Entertainment Network, Contains Moderate Peril, has announced that they will be ending. I wanted to express my heartfelt thanks to Roger for bringing his podcast on board. He was pretty much the most popular podcast in the network when we brought them on, and I know that that helped the network out quite a bit. I'm hoping that they saw some benefit from being in the network as well. Really enjoyed Contains Moderate Peril, and am sad to see it ending, but I know that Roger has some things going on in his real life, job-wise, that are taking up a lot more time now. And I also know how much work doing a podcast can be, weekly, monthly, whatever it is, when it comes to scheduling guests and planning out the shows. Sometimes it just takes up a lot more time than you had originally anticipated. So that's kind of a sour note, but on a good note, just a couple of days ago, I did notice on Contains Moderate Peril, there is a new podcast starring Roger and his original co-host, Brian, called Burton and Scrooge, and it looks like they're kind of getting back to the basics as far as just talking about the things that interest them, turning on the microphone, and then uploading it to SoundCloud. Roger says it's not very slick, and there's not any of the flashiness that went along with Contains Moderate Peril, but I did notice that he got DJ Rick Santos to do the voiceover at the beginning again with some lead-in music, so it's not exactly amateur hour. It actually sounds like a pretty decent podcast, especially for an episode 1, but we know Roger and Brian are both very seasoned veterans in this hobby, so would expect nothing less. I would go ahead and give that a listen over at containsmoderateperil.com if you're interested, or if you liked Contains Moderate Peril, the podcast. I think you'll enjoy this as well. Another note on podcasts. I got a note today from Shannon or Zelly over at Multiplaying, and it seems that podcast is also going to be ending. They're also a new addition to the Gaming and Entertainment Network, but good news there as well. They're actually going to be spinning up a new podcast, which is very similar to the one they've been doing, but not necessarily connected to the multiplaying.net community that they are a part of. The new podcast there is going to be called The MMO Show. They've already got a website set up for it, themmoshow.com. They've already got some social networking icons over there if you wanted to follow that. And all indications are that they would like to continue being part of TGen, and as far as I can tell, TGen is amiable to that. So hopefully the MMO show will be the next newest podcast on the Gaming and Entertainment Network, and you'll see it on there very soon. Wanted to also mention that new project that I'm involved in here currently. I think those of you who follow the LOTRO and the LOTRO Players community are aware of this. I was asked by the LOTRO Players lead director Andang to do a voiceover for a project that he's been working on and actually had been noodling on for about a year now. It's going to be a Middle-earth lore series that uses video games as kind of a video backdrop for a short documentary style YouTube series. As it turns out, they needed somebody to actually read the scripts and hopefully bring the story to life through their voice, and they asked me to do it, and I was very excited to try something new, that being something along the lines of almost voice acting. So I'm going to be the narrator of that series. It's going to be called Middle-earth Lore. There is also a Twitter account out there for that. So if you'd like to get updates, I'm sure I'll be retweeting as soon as those episodes come out. I'm going to look at the calendar here, and this is all tentative, but if you're interested in checking that out, it looks like the first episode's public release is currently scheduled for the end of June right now. So be looking for that sometime around the last week of June, and hopefully that's going to be something that takes off, and we'll be able to continue doing that. Lastly, as you know, I always do a featured TGen show in this spot. Normally, according to this schedule, I'm supposed to be promoting Contains Moderate Peril, but as we just discussed at the top of this segment, CMP, the podcast, is going offline. So I'm going to go ahead and include that bumper at this point, kind of for old time's sake, and I know that Roger's going to keep the back catalog up at least for a little while, so if you are a fan of that show, or if you've never checked it out, head on over there and listen to as many as you can before Roger decides that it's time to take them down.
Contains Moderate Peril, a weekly podcast about gaming, movies, and popular culture. Featuring guests, discussions, and giveaways. New episodes every Monday. Exclusively on the Gaming and Entertainment Network. Contains Moderate Peril. Gaming, movies, peril.
As for feedback, we don't have any feedback this month, but if you want to send in feedback, you can send it directly to my email address, braxwolf@gmail.com, and I'll read it on the podcast. This is a reminder that Beyond Boss Fights is on iTunes and would appreciate your ratings and reviews out there. Beyond Boss Fights is also on Stitcher and Player FM, so go ahead and add it to your playlists in those apps as well. Braag, thank you so much for being here. It was a fun conversation, and hopefully we'll have you back again at some point.
Thanks. I'll go write some feedback right now about how great this episode was.
Would you mind giving out your contact information?
You can find me on Twitter at Braag Son of Balin. That's Braag with 2 A's. The second A stands for agility. And my website is lightthebeacons.com. You can also send me an email directly at bragsonofbalin@gmail.com.
And as for me, you can follow me on Twitter at Braxwolf. That's BRAXWOLF. You can send me an email at braxwolf@gmail.com. I'm on a Nook, Facebook, and YouTube. Just look for Braxwolf. And you can also follow my blog or read it at braxwolf.com. Thanks all, and we'll see you next month.
Baruch Kazaa.
Can edit that out.
Can I curse a bunch of times right now? Gosh dang,
I was always so afraid to clear my throat on LOTRO Players News because Andeg didn't hardly edit out anything either. I don't have any problem on this one, though.
Well, now that you're not on the show anymore, if you want to lambaste that guy, go for it.
No. I would never, ever do that. He's a great guy.
No, of course not. Oh, I forgot. You're still doing the lore show. So. Suddenly, a new narrator has been announced for the lore series this week.
Grime a Wormtongue.
Oh boy, that's a revisionist history. That would be like drunk history, right? With Grime a Wormtongue.